All right. So hello, everyone. We're Team Sparksmith Studio, and this semester we have been working on the XR welding educational game. So let's start a little bit from our project background. So our client is Professor Dina El-Zanfali from the School of Design at Carnegie Mellon, who's actually here today. And so in the US, there were 375,000 metal worker needed in 2024. And in order to solve that metal worker shortage, our client, Professor Dina, designed a AR welding simulator that helps train the technical skills about the welding. So for the Weld AR, as you can see, it is an AR welding experience, and it is built for MetaQuest 3. It has real-time feedback on distance, angle, and speed. It's attached to a real welding gun through calculated 3D printing parts, and it has a final evaluation panel. It is a great foundation, and it is highly effective for training welding skills for the welders. But we found the opportunity to about user retention, and also we wanted to see if we can attract new users by adding an interactive layer to it. Before we move anything to the design, we wanted to ground our ideas with real context. So we visited the IAW, the Industrial Art Workshop, to actually learn welding, and also we talked to the industrial people like John Fulmer from the TechSpark, and also through the continuous discussion with our client, Professor Dina, we were brought to answer this challenging question. Will adding a narrative-driven gamified experience help with motivation, engagement, and also user retention? So as a team of game developers, we brought this answer: a gamified VR experience that transforms the player from little interest and confidence in welding into learners who develop genuine curiosity and motivation to pursue welding more seriously. And our target audience is teens and young adults from 15 to 21 and preparing to learn welding but lack interest and confidence into welding. And our final deliverable will be the 15-minute single-player VR experience featuring a complete and self-contained narrative-driven scenario. And I'll hand it to Ethan for the previous research.
All right, hello everyone. I'm going to talk a bit about our research process. So as you can see, Dina had in her project these custom controllers to integrate real welding equipment into her experience. However, we quickly determined that we wanted the player's hands to be free to interact with other things in the environment, and so it didn't really make sense for us to use these custom controllers. So then that brought up the question of how do we grasp the feeling then of welding in this VR world without these real-world elements to help? And so to answer that question, we looked at how other existing VR simulations and games integrate welding mechanics. We looked at real-world tutorials of welding and got an idea of how welding works in real life. And most importantly, we got the opportunity to visit the Industrial Arts Workshop and get a crash course ourselves in welding and get firsthand experience of how it actually feels to weld. And our main takeaways from these experiences was that it's very important to have clear instructions for the users. There's a lot of very precise elements of welding, and it's very important that we get that across to the user in an effective way. And also it's very important to have realistic visual and sound effects, as there's very distinct visual and audio feedback when welding that give you an idea of how well and poorly you're doing. And also there's a certain magic to sticking things together that we really experienced ourselves when we got the chance to weld that we really wanted to incorporate into our game. So that brings us to the next question of our research, which is what activity makes welding more engaging that we should bring into our experience? And again, from IAW and our own experience learning welding, making your own art, just sticking things together and making something is extremely fun and very, very engaging for all of us as essentially new welders. So we decided we really wanted to implement that into our game as well. And finally, we had to determine what setting would foster meaning and excitement with welding. And our two main directions we were thinking about early on was a more realistic setting and then a more fictional sci-fi setting. And after a lot of internal discussion and discussion with Professor Dina and also polling various ETC people as well, there was a lot more interest and excitement among everybody for the sci-fi setting as opposed to the realistic one. So that's what we decided to jump into and go after. And so ultimately, we decided to make a game about welding in space with a goal of fixing your spaceship to return safely home to the planet Earth. And I'll give it to Zealand to talk about the mechanics.
Yeah, so to achieve the goals we set before, we built 4 core objectives. So welding, safety, evaluation, and also creation. So let's dive into each of those objectives to see how it shapes our experience. So first is welding. This is our primary interaction in the game. There's 2 main tasks involving welding. The first is to grab metal scraps and weld them together. We want this process to feel authentic as possible, so when the player welds, they will meet with dynamics, visual sparks, haptic feedbacks, and also spatial audios.
Once you have retrieved 2 pieces of metal, bring both of them to the welding booth directly next to the scrap. These pieces will do. Place them next to each other on the bench and hold the highlighted trigger to weld.
So the second task is to fix cracks on a broken fuel tank.
Proceed with extreme caution, Captain.
So players will be given following instructions after they have finished welding. And for the standard scrap metals, they are submitted into a submit machine that will teleport it into needed areas of the ship. Oh, sorry. Also for the safety, that's the helmet that we implemented.
That is a start. There are still more cracks to be filled.
Here you can see that's flashbang if you didn't pull the mask down, but also we implement an auto darkening feature to protect the player's eyes. And we also implement a power machine that will be turned on to simulate the start process of MIG welding. And as I mentioned before, this is the evaluation process for the standard metal.
This will be sufficient. Please remove the welded material from the booth and bring it to the submission receptacle for transport. Well done, Captain.
And for the fuel tank, player will need to fill every cracks on the fuel tank for it to be turned on. And after it's turned on, the player will need to return it to the casing to restore power.
My scans show no more cracks. Please return the fuel cell to its casing immediately. Fuel cell restored. Well done, Captain.
And finally, after intense repair, player are introduced to the creation objective of our game. So in this part, player are introduced to the sculpture room, which is basically a sandbox reward that they can build with random materials and create whatever they want.
That your true passions lie. You may now process this near-death experience through the medium of sculpture.
For our part of our game, we visit Mu-19 for artistic references and inspirations for futuristic welding environments. So based on our visit and our many references of sci-fi environments, we create this spaceship main room environment for players to wander around and find their locations to weld and to create. There's a very important that in VR, the interactables are obvious for players to see. So for example, our metal scraps for the first stage are placed in a very bright orange crate. And for the cracks on the fuel cell, we make sure that it looks very prominent, that the cracks are there for players to locate and fix. There are many direction indications in this map, which is a main part of our iteration and play test feedback, is that in VR, players are hard to navigate around the VR space. much less than in a regular PC game. So we make sure that we use textures and emissive text to show players which part of the place they need to go and where they need to go, and how they're going to go there. And for example, the booth and submission table, which are very important, they're highlighted with emissive text too. And during the playthrough, the players will find themselves in different situations. So we create many situational instructions for players to see, such as the "Do Not Cross" sign that was initially in front of the sculpture room, but will disable after the player get to that stage, and also the warning lights and the main screen that indicates the current status of the spaceship and the current objective of the player. For VR controller, we implemented 2D controller UI for players to see and to learn how to perform their actions in the beginning of the game. And to set up the space theme in the beginning of the game, we also create the animated meteorites. And for the VFX and dynamics of the game, we create spark visual effects when players are welding, and the dissolve effects for players to submit, and the shader for glowiness when player needs to grab something.
Great. So now we've shown how our game looks and it feels. Let's talk about the impact they have. So first, we developed this 15-minute prototype, which successfully achieving our MVP goal of having this complete, self-contained, and narrative welding experience. And then the next step is we need to answer the core question that we have. Will our experience actually transform players with little interest in welding into learners who have this genuine confidence, interest, and also motivation to continue welding? To answer this question, we conducted multiple play tests, and we gathered both quantitative and qualitative data. And here's what we found out. So the majority of people has this increase in confidence to weld, and also they are really have this strong engagement in our experience. In addition, they have high motivation to continue welding even after our experience is done. So based on all this result, our hypothesis is validated that adding a layer of gameplay and narrative can actually largely improve engagement and motivation. So our next action is to actually give the build to share the build with our professional professor Dina El-Zenfali from School of Design, so she can work on the further research of Weld AR. We are also going to share our build with Industrial Art Workshop, our partnership, and they can use this building with their students in real classroom settings. And in terms of future potential, we can see that there's few directions we can go, including we can extend the gameplay, we can make it more advanced. Also, we can add like additional mechanics like grinding and polishing, make it more realistic. In addition, more broadly, our goal actually aligns with the initiatives of National Science Foundation and their program called Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program, which focuses on like increased engagement, participation, and interest in technical skills. So our project, making welding more accessible and engaging, can be considered as a small step toward that large goal. And that's all. Thank you for watching. We're Team Sparksmith Studio. So this is our team, and our faculty advisors are Derek and Scott, and our consultant is Jonathan, and also our client, really, really great person to work with, Dina El-Zenfali. Do you want to stand? Oh, no? Okay. All right. But thank you. Yeah. And also, here's our website. You can find our contact there, and we're more than happy to answer any questions you have. Oh, yeah.
Sorry if I just completely missed this, but can you go a bit into the sound design of the Spark sounds? Because I've heard that that's like really important, and whether you have distinctions between doing it right, doing it slightly wrong, all those kind of things.
Yeah, so okay, I'll just talk loud.
This one?
No. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the way that we have the sound design work for the sparks is I got a bunch of isolated spark sounds, and as you're welding, we play them at random. However, and the effect that it makes, like when you're welding well, and when you're welding poorly, then that sound stops. And what the effect that that makes is when you're welding well and smoothly, all of the spark sounds flow very nicely together, and it makes it sound very complete, very full like it does in real life. However, if there's bits where you aren't quite perfect, it breaks up the sparks, and it makes it sound very scattered, and it's very obviously not quite correct, and it does mimic the real sound quite well.
So you guys showed what the gameplay is like when you are doing the welding properly and you succeed. I'm curious what the design is for if you actually don't do a proper weld. What kind of feedback does it give? And actually, how do you define the success or failure? Like the density of the line, or what is it?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about that. We actually had a fairly difficult time kind of determining what we wanted the fail state to be, because ultimately we're trying to increase that confidence in welding, and so ultimately we just it ends up in a more of a pass-fail type situation where it really is, you can't really get to a state where you submit it and it tells you that you are wrong and incorrect, but the ability to complete the thing, if you are not welding correctly, then it simply does not weld. So there is not necessarily a you did this badly evaluation, but you aren't able to get to the success state without welding correctly.
I don't know much about spaceships and fuel cells, but it seems to me that, is it a good idea to weld on a fuel cell?
Well, we kind of landed this entire story like more futuristic, and the reason we want to have a fuel cell is because we want some object that you can hold in hand, you can turn around, and to find where to weld, like have this kind of experience. And yeah, so it's the future thing.
All right, I guess that's a good answer. Who else?
Well, I had the same question about the feedback and the welding thing, so I'll skip that. But I wanted to say I really liked the part where you talked about making art with the welding and kind of like the free play with the welding. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in going more into that. And then maybe if people can sort of play before they do the missions or after the missions, they could have a way to sort of export their creation and display it in some sort of online gallery or something. Because I think that would be really fun to sort of,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's a really good advice, and that can be the direction we can iterate if we have a chance in the future. And because in the beginning, right now, we are just verbally telling that you're an artist, you're making art. If they can have this experience in the beginning, I think that would be a really strong proof of like what your occupation really is, some type of thing. So thank you for the advice.